And we are live, family. Welcome to Conversations with Brother Asar. I am your host, Asar Imhotep, from the Bantu Worldview Institute for the Advancement of Science and Culture, and 1 millionth of the members of. Hold on. I am your host, Asar Imhotep. Of course, we forget to turn the phone off. Okay, so at least I know that I'm live. So, hold on one sec. Always these technical difficulties. Anyway, as I stated, I'm Brother Asar Imhotep with the Bantu Worldview Institute for the Advancement of Science and Culture, and the Armor Raw Squad, and a host of other organizations and groups. And it's been a minute. Y'all know I kind of sporadically spread these conversations out on YouTube as not to flood my YouTube page with a whole bunch of conversations, so that when I bring you something, it is meaningful and useful and something special. So in the tradition that I have, usually when I go to conferences, if the conference itself is not streamed live or there's no videotaping, so to speak, then what I normally do is I come right back around within a week of the conference and re-present my presentation to my YouTube channel. So within that spirit, there was the ASCAC, that is the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations, their annual Kemetic Studies Conference. And this year it just happened to be here in Philly. And so I submitted an abstract, and it was accepted, and I attended. It was just this past weekend. I think, what was it, March 15th through 18th, something like that. It's probably like a total of 4 days, 3 days of actual conference, and then the fourth day more so for the administrative aspect of it. So that wasn't really open to the public. But so I presented there. It was accepted, very well, and I had a good time. This was actually my second ASCAC conference, national conference. So the first one I ever attended was in Atlanta 2 years ago. I didn't go to the one in New Orleans. That was last year, but I've been to the regional conference that same year. So the regional conference didn't have one this past go round because we were hosting the actual national. So we just focused our energy on making that conference a success. Or I should say I just participated, but our region, the Mid-Atlantic region. So shout out to everyone who went. Shout out to everyone who wanted to go but couldn't go. And shout out to everyone listening live or catching this after the live because they couldn't make it for whatever reason. So without further ado, I am going to get started and say hello to my ironing board in the back. Should have moved it, but who cares? Anyway, so we're going to get started. We may have some guests either from the Sashu Ni Meta group, or some of the Armor Raw Squad members probably come in and chime in later. So if we hear something random, that's more than likely one of them. But I'm going to get started now, and I should say that the presentation was initially 25 minutes at the actual conference, but since I have a little time here, it's going to be a little longer, and it is going to include some slides and things that I didn't have enough time to go over there, but they were bonus slides at the end. So I rearranged it so they're kind of more in the flow of the actual presentation. So this one will be longer because I will actually put up the video from the actual conference once that is done and sent to me And so, but this one will be more detailed than the one that I will upload later, live from the conference. So just keep that in mind. So it's not going to be the 25 minute version of the presentation. It will be a little bit longer. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to post your question in the chat room as we go on. So I have my phone up, and so I'll be periodically checking. So if I don't respond immediately or something like that, just give me a little time, because this of course will be focused on the presentation. So shout out to Janelle, Chief X, Sister Melissa, she was at the conference. Hush Your Mouth, Seshu crew in the house. Brother Sean. Those are just people I just see in the chat, already. So shout out to all of you. Thank you for attending and listening. And I am going to get started. So I'm just going to share my screen. And yes, the entire window. And let's go to the presentation. So y'all let me know in the chat if y'all can see the presentation in full when you see it. Just give me a heads up and let me know that it is visible on your screen, the actual presentation, and not my smugly face at this moment. So all right, I see Sister Melissa said she sees the screen. So we're going to get started. So my presentation was actually on Friday, March the 16th. So today isn't March the 16th, but that's when I actually did the presentation. So, but the title of my presentation is Cyena-Ntu, Ancient Kemet and the Bantu Worldview. And I won't read all of the abstract, and so you'll just get the gist of what I am focused on, throughout the presentation. But as the title would suggest, I'm essentially making a connection between ancient Kemet and the Bantu cultures of Central, West, and Southern Africa, and arguing essentially that the ancient Egyptian language and culture belongs to the Ntu universe, or the Ntu family. So that's what Cyena-Ntu means. Cyena meaning family, and or group, member of, and then Ntu meaning being. It's the root of the word Bantu, meaning people in the plural, Muntu, the singular. So we'll get started. Of course, we like to give thanks to all of our esteemed elders and ancestors. Many who are on this page here are now deceased. Everyone in the center of this piece is deceased. So we should all know Dr. Ben, John G. Jackson, Dr. Jacob Carruthers, Ivan Van Sertima, and Dr. John Henry Clark. For those who can see over here, there's a very young Dr. Mario Beatty, Dr. Greg Carr, saying here, I don't know who this is in the center. Somebody can probably tell me. But, this is Dr. Mario Beatty is the current president of ASCAC. And you will see Dr. Leonard Jeffers. He was there at ASCAC this year. We should know Dr. Malefe Asante, Carter G. Woodson, the late Uncle Ra, who wrote the book Let the Ancestors Speak, and our elder Dr. Wade Nobles in the cut, Marimba Ani, a host of folks who have paved the way, Marcus Garvey, for us to do what we do, and those are people who I pay homage to, And in the case of the esteemed ancestors, pour libations for, and all have my utmost respect. And so it's in their names and on their foundation for which this presentation stands on. So there is much of this presentation that is found in my 2016 text, Nesubiti, King in Ancient Egyptian, a lesson in paronymy and leadership. But there's other aspects of this that are going to be released this year, hopefully by the end of the summer, in my upcoming book, Eluja Volume 2, Cyena-Ntu Science and Philosophy. This isn't the official cover. This is just something I made up in PowerPoint. So it looks like I actually have a cover when in fact I do not as of yet. So, but that book is coming out. And so some of this information that is not in my Nesubiti book will be in there. So it's a continuation as far as this particular subject is concerned, and it builds on some of the things that were mentioned in Nesubiti. So, so I start off with Dr. Theophilo Obenga. In 1993, he wrote this text that you see in the front. So this is him on the right-hand side. And he wrote this text, The Common Origin of Ancient Egyptian, Coptic, and Modern Black African Languages, written in French, and Introduction to African Historical Linguistics. And he is also the founder and one of the editors of the Egyptological Review of African Civilizations, the Ankh Journal. And a very powerful journal. It actually still is up and running. They just are kind of slow, is because it's a tedious process the way that they do it to actually create the journals. So this is a very important work. But this important work that we see here by Dr. Theophilo Obenga, the aim of this text was to demonstrate scientifically and systematically that the ancient Egyptian language belonged in a family which included many of the other West and Central African languages. And so he set out to demonstrate this fact using his own native language, which is Mbochi, which is a Bantu language in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And in the process of doing this, he used a number of supporting African languages that, by the standard of classification in Africanist linguistics, belong to a separate language family than what is believed the ancient Egyptian language belonged to. So a linguist by the name of Joseph Greenberg created these 4 language phylums, and the names are Afro-Asiatic, Nilo-Saharan, Niger-Congo, and Khoisan. As it currently stands, the consensus is that the ancient Egyptian language belongs to the Afro-Asiatic language phylum, and it is related to languages such as the Semitic languages, Omotic languages, Chadic languages, and Cushitic languages. There are other language families, as I mentioned, especially Niger-Congo and Nilo-Saharan. These languages include languages like Bantu, Yoruba, as far as Niger-Congo is concerned, Wolof, Fulani, the Kalajan, Nuba languages, of the Sudan, Gabaya and things of that nature. The so-called Nilotic languages, Nuer, Luo, just to name a few. And so the thought is that because these languages are supposed to be separated by these great phylums, that you would not find a relationship between the ancient Egyptian language and languages like Wolof and Bantu. Well, in this text, Theophilo Obenga demonstrates that that is in fact a falsehood, and that we have to reimagine and reconsider how we are classifying African languages. So he also sought to falsify the hypothesis, or the Afroasiatic hypothesis. And so in the process of doing that, he created a new label for a language family he called Negro-Egyptian, or Black Egyptian language. And so Negro does not have the same, connotation as it does here in the United States. When we say Negro, like you call someone a Negro today, those might be considered fighting words. And so, but that's not the case. It's just simply the French Latin word for black. And so he called his label, his language family, Black Egyptian. And so that was for political reasons, in part because the Africanists were arguing, especially Joseph Greenberg, that the Afroasiatic language family originated in Asia and was brought into Africa by these Caucasian Semites. And from there, the other language families, developed, and basically they adopted Afroasiatic from these Caucasian speakers from Asia. So, with Egypt being right there on the edge in the corner, that means the ancient Egyptians were in fact Caucasians. And this, would explain why, at least in their minds, why the Egyptian culture was the way it is. And they were able to accomplish what they were able to accomplish because allegedly they were Caucasian. So, however, the notion of his Negro Egyptian, the grouping of the family, was not politically based. It was simply based on a systematic examination of African languages, and which showed that these labels and these borders given by Africanist linguists were in fact non-tenable. They did not exist. And so he had to created his own language family. There was a few problems, however. When we're dealing with science and we're grouping, especially languages cannot be grouped together by race. And so since the word black is used racially, it poses a problem because there's no relationship between language and biology, because a genetic population, a unique genetic population, can within one generation shift its language to another language that belongs to a totally different language family or group. The English language, when it came to the Africans, is a prime example, as a result of the transatlantic slave holocaust. And so while we are genetically African, we are linguistically European. And so you cannot base what language that people speaks based on their biology or their phenotype. And so this poses a scientific problem. And not only that, he didn't really complete his work. And so while he provided enough evidence, he provided the smoking gun, he provided the probable cause to move forward, he did not fully do a complete analysis that would warrant a Negro Egyptian language family. And so it was still at this point in the hypothesis stage. And so he had an observation. So he was supposed to go several more steps to develop the Negro Egyptian theory, if we understand how the scientific method works. And so that's basically what I just said there. This is a screenshot of his Negro Egyptian grouping. And so we can see we have Egyptian, Cushitic, Chadic, Nilo-Saharan, and Niger-Kordofanian, which is basically Nilo-Saharan and, well, Nilo-Saharan's in another lane, but there are some who believe Nilo-Saharan and Niger-Kordofanian or Niger-Congo belong to a superfamily. But what he essentially did is he took out the Semitic language of Afroasiatic and Berber, and he created, he left Cushitic, he left Chadic, and grouped that all under Negro Egyptian. But what he didn't realize is that the same issues that plague Afroasiatic also plague Nilo-Saharan, Niger-Congo. And so these are all invalid language families. These were not created by the historical comparative method. They're all based on Greenberg's mass comparison method. And, you know, that's another lesson for another time. But just know that the same issues that plague Afroasiatic indeed plague Niger-Congo and Nilo-Saharan. And so for him to group Nilo-Saharan and Niger-Congo in his Negro Egyptian was also very problematic. So as I discussed, some epistemological problems with the Negro Egyptian is that the label is race-based, which ultimately makes it unscientific. There's also confusion as persons can't distinguish between the Egyptian language and Negro Egyptian as a language family. And so, you know, when I get into these discussions about Negro Egyptian, they think that we're talking about strictly the ancient Egyptian language. And that's not the case. We're talking about a family of languages for which the ancient Egyptian languages are included with. So, so that is, you know, problematic. And as I just stated, it is not reconstructed using the historical comparative method. And so, excuse me as I took a drink. Hold on, I'm just checking something. Okay, so this is very important, that last point, because when we're doing historical comparative linguistics, we're not only reconstructing the parent language, we're also reconstructing the primal culture, the primal psychology, the primal history of a people. And so there's a method, the historical comparative method allows for us to really do that. And so this is as a citation in terms of exploring the method here, this is the Oxford Introduction to Proto-Indo-European and the Proto-Indo-European World by J.P. Mallory and D.Q. Adams. So on page 117 of this text, they state, as it regards Indo-European, there is only one route to the reconstruction of Indo-European culture that offers any hope of reliability, and that is language. Although we might compare cultural traditions, behavior, or material culture among the different Indo-European groups, this exercise would be a very uncertain plunge into comparative ethnography or archaeology, and we would be forced to compare peoples at vastly different time depths. So it's only by systematically reconstructing the language that we can determine within the Indo-European family what is actually part of Indo-European culture that was passed down throughout the generations as these languages dialectically differentiated themselves and became distinct languages. So how will we know what is inherited in the larger primordial culture versus what was spread via hyperdiffusion, you know, via conquest or trade or something to that nature? Is only the historical comparative method in reconstructing the mother language allows for us to do that. And so this is why it's important for us to see what is essentially inherent in certain African language excuse me, in certain African cultures, how can we tell what is inherent and what is based on diffusion? The only way we can do that is if we reconstruct the family. So if Theophilo Obenga didn't reconstruct Negro Egyptian, we don't have a scientific basis to say what is essentially historically of this African group and what is, you know, spread via diffusion, either trade or conquest, you know, or just simply, you know, borrowings and migrations and things of that nature. So that's why we want to reconstruct. And so with that said, in 2010, an electrical engineer who took 10 years to study historical comparative linguistics picked up where Theophilo Obenga left off. And he decided to take on the task of completing what Theophilo Obenga didn't complete. And so, but he did it a little differently. So Theophilo Obenga, as I mentioned earlier, essentially lumped all the African languages together and called it Negro Egyptian. But with Mboli being an actual scientist, you know, he sided on the side of caution. He proceeded with on the side of caution, and he decided to dispense with all of the language families, given the fact that none of the language families were scientifically proven to exist. And so I don't know who came in the chat room, but welcome. I mean, who came in on the panel?
It's bro. What's good?
Hey, peace, brother. Thank you for coming through.
Absolutely.
All right. This brother Unk from the Amara Squad. So yeah, so I'm going to continue. So with Jean-Claude Mboli, he decided to dispense with these unproven labels and to start from scratch and to see where the evidence goes. And unlike Theophilo Obenga, he only see if you can mute your mic. He only stuck with a certain number of languages. And so Theophilo Obenga, you know, wasn't consistent with the languages in which he used outside of his own Mbochi. And so he would go across Africa and grab languages. And so Jean-Claude Mboli didn't do that. He just grabbed a number of languages which he thought might be related, and then he did the scientific experiments to actually see if that is the case. And so as a result of that process, he came up with a different schema of Negro Egyptian than Theophilo Obenga. But before we go there, as I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, the Cyena-Ntu is the label that I have given Negro Egyptian to deal with the race problem of the label. And so I got that name actually from who you see on the screen right now. That's Dr. Mubabinge Bilolo. And he wrote a text in French towards a Egyptian Coptic and Luba dictionary, or a Luba Coptic and Egyptian dictionary, if you read it backwards, actually. And so the Bantu, or kind of like the Bantu-ness of the Egyptian Coptic vocabulary, you know, in the essays of Holmberger and Obenga. And so, however, he used this phrase for basically all Black African languages. And so that is untenable as well, because they may not belong all to the same language family. The only way that you can determine that is if you actually go through the process of reconstructing. And so when I use Cyena-Ntu, I'm not using it in the same way that Dr. Bilolo is using it to mean all Black African languages. I'm using it in a narrow sense to only refer to the languages that were demonstrated to be related by Theophilo Benga and Jean-Claude Mboli, but more so that language family, which for now was formerly known as Negro Egyptian. So that's the label that I've given it. So the Ntu family. And so this is the kind of the grouping that you see of Negro Egyptian. And so this is broken down into three primary stages. So you have the archaic Cyena-Ntu, then you have the classical stage, which you see kind of in the center here, which is unlabeled classical. And then you have what we call post-classic Cyena-Ntu. And, the details of how all of this works out is beyond the scope of this discussion, but just understand that we are currently, in the post-classic stage, and is broken up into two different dialects, and which Mboli calls the Bere dialect and the Beher dialect. And the Bere dialect includes languages such as Hausa, Zande, Middle Egyptian, and the Beher dialect includes languages like Coptic, Songo, and Somali. And so those who are familiar with ancient Egyptian language, you will notice that Mboli separates Middle Egyptian from Coptic. And so the consensus is that Coptic, the assumption is by the consensus, is that Coptic is the last stage of a single language continuum that starts from the Old Kingdom. And but Mboli, through his analysis, suggests that Middle Egyptian and Coptic are two separate languages that belong to two different branches of Cyena-Ntu, the language family. So again, that's another discussion for another time. And so this is a reconfiguration of Mboli's post-classic Negro Egyptian stage and the languages that come out of it. So, but again, remember that we're now calling it Cyena-Ntu. And so this, with this, I have color coded as well the branches. And so we can see that there's two primary branches, as I stated earlier, the Bere branch and the Beher branch. And then each one of those branches split off as well based on the accentuation, or lack thereof, on the syllables and how the shapes of words, come about. And so, but I want y'all to pay attention to the center, the green row or column here. And so the post-classic Cyena-Ntu stage, the Bantu languages, which I call Chi-Bantu, are the closest to this stage of the language family. And so it is a continuation of a direct continuation of that language family, post-classic, or this stage of the language, post-classic Cyena-Ntu. And so Proto-Bantu or pre-Proto-Bantu is basically post-classic Cyena-Ntu. And from this pre-Proto-Bantu comes these other branches. This is why I label it the Ntu family, because it's all Bantu. All of it is Bantu, Chi-Bantu, and so all of it is Bantu. And so that's why I call Chi-Bantu specifically what we would in modern days call Bantu languages. So Chi-Bantu, but all of these are Ntu languages, and so and I also included Sumerian in the Bere, the Para-Bantu Bere stage, and we'll get more into that in the upcoming book. And so I don't want to spend too much time here. So this is a map that I recreated. And so the proposed homeland of the Cyena-Ntu speakers being over here near the Great Lakes region, and the Chi-Bantu speakers migrating here directly into Central Africa, with the Para-Bantu Bere speakers moving towards into Sudan. And from this, area in the Sudan, these languages spread out. So the Bambara, Hausa language, Zande, Middle Egyptian, and Sumerian. And so this is another topic for another day, but I just wanted to give you some background on Cyena-Ntu and, you know, what types of conclusions based on our studies we have come to based on this Mboli model. And so what the focus of this talk is going to be is on the term nature. And so I want to define what a nature is by using the Ntu languages. The Ntu languages in general and the Chi-Bantu specifically. And so for most of us, we should know that the word nature, or how we define it as nature, is defined as God. And there are a few folks who are who do not like the term God and says it's not accurately defined, or it's not able to accurately define African conceptualizations of the divine and divine forces. And I'm here to say and to demonstrate actually a little bit later that that is in fact incorrect. And we say this because throughout our studies, we've discovered that there is a relationship between Indo-European and African languages. There's a history of contacts and of borrowings, a large part of borrowings into the Indo-European languages. And so they have a lot of African vocabulary and inherent since Proto-Indo-European times. And so we'll get to that a little later. So let me look at this chat real quick. Where did the Coptic come from if it's a separate, distinct from the Kemetic language? Coptic is still a Kemetic language in the sense that African Americans are, you know, American citizens. You know, we exist here in, you know, America as a distinct group, but for the most part, we're considered Americans. And so it's the same thing with Coptic. With Coptic, it's more so the issue is it's like the French and the English language. And so French belongs to a language line of Indo-European called the Romance languages, coming out of Vulgar Latin. But English comes out of the Germanic languages. They're both related languages. However, they belong to two different branches of the Indo-European language family. And throughout the course of history, the English speakers came into contact with the French speakers. So you should know that like in 1000 or 1100, the French actually invaded the island of Britain and took over London and ruled for like 300 years or so, 300 to 400 years. And as a result of that long-term rulership, the language, the prestige language was actually French in Britain. And as a result of that long extended period of time, the English language borrowed, quote unquote, basically 10,000 words from French. And so 70% of the English language is non-Germanic words. It consists of non-Germanic words. And there are also some grammatical features of English that were actually borrowed from French as well. And so we have the same issue in the same or a similar issue in Egypt. It is my argument that the Coptic speakers, the original Coptic, what became the Coptic speakers, the late kingdom speakers, were the original Egyptians who existed and lived there. The Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom Egyptian speakers were the invaders who came from the south and united the two kingdoms. We keep talking about the two kingdoms, but what was the other kingdom? This is what we have to ask ourselves. And so there were other groups who spoke indigenous languages there in the Nile Valley. And so remember that the Sahara is drying up at this time, and it's pushing migrants further and further into the Nile Valley and along the Nile River itself. And so you have different ethnic groups, different languages being spoken there. And so what we're calling Coptic is just one of those native languages, but it is not the same as Middle Egyptian. But like the English language, it borrowed heavily from Middle Egyptian because Middle Egyptian was the language of power and prestige. And so that'll be another topic. And actually, based on the question and answer that we had with Dr. Mario Beatty after my presentation, we're actually going to have, you know, an open forum on just what I'm talking about right now. So, so and I've seen her comment. I appreciate your careful articulation of the lineage of the language. You keep introducing topics for other days. I can't help it, but because it's so much involved, you know, with just what I'm talking about here. So those aren't necessarily the focus of this talk, but they are necessary to get the context for which my talk, you know, exists. And so I hope I answered your question. And so I'm going to continue now with the word nature. And so nature is defined in a number of ways in the Egyptological literature. And so in one text, The Complete Gods and Goddesses of Ancient Egypt by Richard Wilkinson, he notes that by examining the word's use in the Egyptian text, it is clear that it actually, the word nature, encompasses a far wider range of meanings than the English word God. The category nature could include deified humans, famous individuals, and from the 30th dynasty onward, those who drowned, as well as benevolent and malevolent spirits. So keep these ideas in mind. Deified humans, they could be alive and or deceased. So deified ancestors, and remember, for those who have my Nesubiti book, elders are considered ancestors as well in African traditions. So there's no distinction because it's based on age. And so deified humans, and benevolent and malevolent spirits. So the concept of spirits is nature defines. And so this is going to be critically important. So just keep those things in mind as we move forward. And so the word nature can be found in a number of African languages. And so here are some that have been proven to be cognates of ancient Egyptian language, ancient Egyptian nature. And so, of course, we have Coptic, and they pronounce it Nute. The R is dropped, and there has to be an explanation for the diphthong for the newt in Nute. In the Songo language, this is pronounced Toro. Zande is Toro as well. In the Tree language of Ghana, it's Ntoro. In the Ewe language of Benin and Ghana as well as Tro. And in the Wolof language is Tor. So it's guardian spirit, spirit of the patrilineage, spirit, protector God. This is how this term is defined in these languages. But we're going to go deeper. These are drawing representations of the hieroglyphic symbol for the word nature. And so it has evolved over the years. And the one on the right is, it actually resembles the earliest, but the one on the right is actually a kind of a late kingdom representation of nature. The classical version is what you see over here on the left, which is a stick that is wrapped in cloth. And so for those who have my book, you also have been introduced to this concept called paronymy and the Rebus principle. And so because the word nature sounds like the word for, or the word nature, cloth, sounds like the word nature for spirit and God, and word nature for staff or pole, all three of these concepts are merged together graphically into the symbol that you see on the left. And so the one on the right is just a pole with cloth strips tied at the top. So that's what the hieroglyph is. And so here are the earliest signs of the word Netcher. And so you can go to a website called www.potmark-egypt.com, and you can see some of the basic signs that you will find on pottery in ancient Egypt. And so here's the word Netcher, you know, in this top left corner. You can see it in a couple of the phrases. So this is pre-dynastic and early dynastic hieroglyphs. So this is how it is. So remember, it is. So this settles the case of if the Netcher is an axe or not. It's not an axe. It's a stick with strips of cloth hanging from it. And so, you have anything to say, Brother Unc, while you're here? If you're listening still, before I move on.
Yeah, I'm right here. I was getting in the car. Well, just real quick, I'm kind of getting to understand. I want to kind of go over the part that Professor Clyde was talking about. I forget the exact term y'all was using.
Okay.
You know what I'm talking about?
Well,
he kept saying it wasn't evidence. Something he kept saying, it's not something. He was like, no, we didn't have to have that. What did he kept saying over and over again?
Was he talking about the
I think he began with a P or something he was saying.
Oh, you talking about the aspiration?
Yeah, okay, yesterday Asper, he kept saying that over and over again. So if you can kind of explain what that is, what he meant by that, and how, if he is wrong with his assertion that that particular thing is needed to prove to prove the point.
Well, that's kind of a bit off topic because he was talking about Mboli's reconstructions on the word cattle. And so, you know, in Dr. Clyde Winter's mind, any word in any African language that has an aspiration to it is a non-existent African word. And so he's prejudging without actually, again, of course, reading the book and seeing how Mboli comes to his reconstructions. So that's something totally different.
Okay.
Than what we're talking
all
about.
right, and real quick, before you move forward, I'd just like to say, I know you wrote a few books on said subject, but in your mind, does the Egyptian language have anything to do with the quote unquote West African languages? Do you see any contact with that? Yeah.
Does the Egyptian language or languages have anything to do with the West African languages?
Yeah, at all.
Yes and no.
Okay, explain.
Yes, in the sense that many of the West African languages and the ancient Egyptian belong to the same language family. So that's what we're talking about here. So Negro Egyptian is, you know, consists of Bambara language, which is in West Africa, Wolof, which is in West Africa. We should also be able to include Yoruba, even though he didn't personally examine that language. But the Zonde, Bantu languages, you know, all of those are related to ancient Egyptian. So there's a relationship that way.
Okay.
And there is a relationship based on certain migrations and certain words and loans from some of the people in the Nile Valley in Egypt proper and the Sudan, who throughout its history, whether through wars or through drought, migrated in various different directions. So some have migrated down south, going towards Uganda, like the Collagen people. And then you have, for example, I think it's the Sango or the Zande, one of those. I think Sango actually derives from Sudan. They now in the Republic of Congo in Central West Africa.
Okay.
You know, and then you just have these other migrant groups, unnamed, who just became absorbed into these other West African communities, but who bring some of their culture and some of their languages, and certain things were borrowed into the local language. So it's a little bit more complex, but it's not a strict, West African languages came out of ancient Egyptian or vice versa. It's
Right,
not.
I got you.
All right.
So we can't show kind of migrations and all that based off the language, based off of other things.
Yeah, we
I
can
think I
show
think I was
migration.
looking at.
Matter of fact, Abu Bakr Mal-Salam has in his tech on the Fulani migrations, but some migrations from ancient Egypt is still in their oral tradition, going all the way into West Africa, into Senegal.
Say that one more time. Repeat that one more time. I want somebody to hear this. Say it again.
Hold on one sec. Let me.
Text you just gave you.
Yeah, so
Text.
it's Abu Bakr Musalam. His text is in French, the Sahara or the Valley of the Nile. And
Okay.
in this text, he cites this oral tradition and of migrations, by a person by the name of Yoro Jiao. So it's an oral tradition amongst the people, but Yoro Jiao decided to write down the oral tradition of them coming from this place in an early period. And so this was in 1822. No, not 1822. What was this? When did he write this? Was it 1855? It's something like that. It's between 1855 and 1919, I think, that he wrote this. So this is before Diop and them, and Diop didn't even know about this record. So it supports a lot of what Diop has said regarding certain migrations from the Nile Valley. But there's history there, and but again, that's going to be a little bit beyond.
Yeah. I was just trying to because I mean I understood those connections, but
Yeah.
was kind of challenged on that lately.
You
That there is no proof that there is no type of connection between those two African nations. None
Yeah,
at
they
all.
haven't talked to
Can't
the
prove
right people who read the right text, and
it.
so we'll definitely, we'll put them on the hit list too
Yeah.
for 2018. So
Yeah, we'll put them on
that's
that hit list. We'll do that.
we'll do that.
Respectfully. Yeah, it's a team. Remember, I'm not gonna bring it. I'm not gonna bring that. I'm not gonna bring that out.
Hey,
But they can get it too, because anybody
get it
can.
too. Everybody, no one's above the crew.
Yeah, no one's above that. Yeah, no one's above that. That's a fact. All right, but go ahead, man. Continue your lesson, man. I'm enjoying
all
it.
right, no doubt, no doubt. Okay, so yeah, so now we're going to get on the pronunciation of the word nature. And so I just wanted to cite two texts here that shows you how the ch part in nature came about and what is the more ancestral pronunciation. And so this, what I'm citing, what you have on the screen right now, is from a text called Semitic Languages, an Outline of a Comparative Grammar, 1997. And he states, the velar K, so K is a velar sound, is palatalized into ch. So it's a process in linguistics called palatalization. In various circumstances, especially when it is contiguous to the vowel I or E and U, or the U sound. Thus, the old Egyptian pronominal suffix ki of the second person feminine singular became chi, and it is conventionally transcribed as ch. So when you see the word netra transcribed with the T with the line under it, you pronounce it ch. So that's why we say netcher. But that ch was palatalized from an earlier K sound. So it wasn't netcher, it was incur, if that makes sense, okay? The Egyptian name Netcher, God, is believed to be related to Semitic Inker, stranger, but it should perhaps be linked with Agal, Inkara, soul, spirit. Remember how Netcher was defined in the beginning as deified humans and spirits. And so in the Agal language, they keep the traditional pronunciation, Inkara, soul, spirit. Also, T may be palatalized as, for example, the Semitic kat, hand. Well, that's not important for right now, but I just wanted to bring that as far as that source is concerned. So the ch in netcher is a palatalized velar. So the earlier pronunciation included a K sound. And so this one is, this next citation is from, and why didn't I put the page number? But believe me, it's there. In Black Athena, Volume 3, The Linguistic Evidence. And so he says, Martin Bernal says, the hieroglyph for Netcher, R8, was a cloth wound round a pole, which I showed y'all earlier, an emblem of divinity used broadly for gods, including deceased monarchs, deceased ancestors, and for the life force in general. Even more difficult to define is what we call the Ka, D28, but it should be Ker, because that grapheme is actually a nasalized uvular trill. It's an R sound. Embracing arms, and we'll get to that and show that symbol in a bit. It is a spirit or one of the Egyptian souls, a manifestation agent or doppelganger of a person or divinity. Interestingly, Netcher and Ka may well have a common origin. This is important, and we'll prove that that is in fact the case. And so what we're saying here is Netcher and the Ka are the exact same word, but the Ka is the more ancestral pronunciation, and Netcher is one that went through a sound change due to palatalization. But they're the same word. So this is the case of either two different languages or two different dialects interacting with each other in ancient Egypt, as we mentioned before. So the origin of Egyptian T from an earlier ki or K, and the nasalized uvular trill as a liquid R or L were discussed in chapter 8 above. Thus, one could hypothesize a form in Kira, in which originally allophonic variants of K and Ki became phonemically distinct and palatalized, became the depalatalized variant lost in the initial N, or the nasal. In fact, the hypothetical protoform exists in reality as Inkira or Inkira, soul life, in the Central Cushitic languages of Benin and Kwara. And Franz Kallis pointed this out in his posthumous work published in 1936. So when you're looking for Netcher in African languages, it's not always going to be pronounced as Netcher. Some languages hold on to the more ancestral form of the word. And so the Cushitic speakers wouldn't know of a Netcher, but they would know of Inkira or Inkira, Inkira or Inkira. These are two long vowels, in these Central Cushitic languages. So just wanted to bring these two different sources, which is essentially saying the same thing. So now that we understand the two ways in which the name was pronounced in African languages, and there are actually more, and we'll probably get into that a little later. But we also have a pronunciation called Adro in the Lugbara language. They exist in Sudan. And so they don't say Netcher, they say Adro. So they lost the N prefix, and it's just Dro, kind of like Tro in the Ewe language in West Africa. So in this text called Lugbara Religion, Ritual Authority Among the East African People, he says that I translate Adro or Adroa as God. Although the correspondence of meaning is not exact, Adro, the basic form of the term, refers to a personified force outside of the control and beyond the understanding of living men who are its creatures. Indeed, unlike our term God, Adro is used also to refer to a category of objects which are manifestations of divinity and beyond the control and understanding of men. So keep that in mind. They're saying that it's outside, it's a force outside the control and beyond the understanding of men. So it's that which is, it is that power behind what we can see that make things happen. So many apparently miraculous things are called Adro or Netcher, such as what I have called the guardian spirit of man, or even matches. The word is sometimes used for testicles, which is unique because the word testicles, there is a variation of the word Neteru that has as its determinatives 3 testicles. And so that's interesting. And for the power of procreation, so that's why you would have it. Because a nature also has to deal with a family person, a parent, somebody who creates or makes, who gives birth to children. So Adro lives on Earth, especially in rivers. He is also found in large trees and thickets and on high mountains and rocky places. He is in every stream. Adro is common to all Lugbara. In addition, each clan has its own spirit called Adro. So you have a personal spirit called Adro, and the clan is a dispersed group which is not concerned in corporate activity. This spirit is also a manifestation of God's power, and in many cases is thought of as having been a distant ancestor. So you can see this is a very encompassed term, but this perfectly defines how Netcher is used, of course, among the Lugbara in the Sudan, but in ancient Kemet as well. Basically, everything is a Netcher. And so when you look into the ancient Egyptian script, that's exactly, how it is used. So you have a town Netcher. Everyone has their own Netcher, Netcher in the river, Netcher in the trees, Netcher in the mountains. Everything has a Netcher because it's a spirit.
Okay.
And so we're going.
The spirit.
I'm sorry.
You was connecting nature with ancestors, distant ancestors. Is that what you said? Distant.
Yeah. So so remember that I said I don't know if you caught it in the beginning, but in the very beginning, when I was defining Netcher in the Egyptological literature, in the book Gods and the complete book of Gods and Goddesses, they define Netcher to include also deified humans, as well as deceased humans, as well as benevolent and malevolent spirits. You get what I'm saying? So when you see that word "dro," which is a cognate for Netcher, in the Lugbara language, and they're defining it and using it in the exact same way, you can use Lugbara to get some insight into ancient Egyptian Netcher, although we don't have anyone personally from ancient Egypt who can tell us that, but we can gain a sense of that by reading the literature and things of that nature. So, but I wanted to introduce this word here because even though this isn't necessarily defined as Netcher, it has the same meaning. But I like this source because it perfectly defines what a Netcher is, even though it's technically using another word. So in the Ga language in Ghana, they use a word called won or wo. And it is cognate with Middle Egyptian Iwon, a god, an epithet for Osiris. In the Yoruba language, it's Iwin, ancestors, ghosts, spirits. In the Ingos language, Won is ancestors, the living dead, shades. In the Bachama language is Won, the demigod in charge of the dead, the demigod in charge of the kingdom of death. And that is Osiris. And so remember, if we see the first definition, Iwon, a god, an epithet for Osiris. And then we see amongst the Bachama people, they have the same word exactly for a demigod who is the king of the underworld, just like Osiris is. But in this text called Religion and Medicine of the Ga People, 1937, Field defines what a wo or won is among the Ga. And he says it is anything that can work but not be seen, and includes the smaller beings of specialized and limited activity associated with medicines and magic. So it's those potent ingredients in medicine, a won. But it's, remember when we was defining Netcher and the Adro, and it's anything that is beyond the understanding and the control of men.
Yeah.
Meaning it's invisible and stuff like this. This is what it's saying here. Anything that can work but not be seen. So in modern times, what do we call anything that can work but not be seen?
God, right?
Besides that, what do we use
gravity,
in physics?
Gravity.
Not gravity.
Not gravity. What we call anything from the
In
hidden?
physics. In physics.
Oh. Shit. A dark matter?
Well, they don't say dark matter. They say dark what?
Dark energy.
Okay, so what is energy?
Energy can't be created nor destroyed.
Besides that characteristic of energy, it's the
Mm-hmm.
ability to do work.
To do work constantly,
Yes.
regular
So
currents.
anything with power, the words for power and energy are defined as the ability to do work. That's the noun of it.
Okay.
You get what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
that's all it is. So when we've been saying energy for the longest, that's how it's technically defined.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
You
you
know.
know I'm feeling that though. You already know.
So we can use this. So when people are talking about having a relationship with the gods,
Mm-hmm.
and they try to dismiss physicists,
Mm-hmm.
they don't know their own culture and they don't know their own traditions.
Facts. Okay.
You know, so
Because
this how we ground this stuff. I'm sorry. Go
well,
ahead.
this how you help. This how you help ground me, because I can't stand the word God, but just based off of just reading the work and just like something like at any moment you just got to be ready to change the paradigm on what you like and what you don't like, and
Mm-hmm.
just have to deal with the evidence and then just get a clear understanding of what is meant in the African traditions when you use the word nature or God. I think that's where you help me out the most. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm a real black atheist all day long when it comes to that monotheism and the whole 9 yards where they portrayed it. But just understanding African traditions, actually helps you get the totality, of understanding just what we was talking about. And I think that's important for everybody to really get that. So this is an excellent class. But continue, brother Sal.
No doubt. So now we're going to get into a little bit of linguistic stuff here. And so remember that, nature is, how we spell when we transliterate. So those who are familiar with hieroglyphs and how to transliterate, that we transliterate it as N, lowercase n, capital T, and then R for nature, because they didn't write their vowels. But it should also be Nkr, Nkr. And so in the related languages, you will see that it is what we said, like Nkara and things of that nature. But the word nature is built off of a root R. And so the ancient Egyptian language, and I'll be going to this more in the upcoming book, is a monosyllabic language built off of a consonant vowel word structure. And so what you see in Egyptian is, a lot of monosyllabic roots with a number of prefixes and suffixes. So the same root that gives us nature gives us these other variants that you see over here on the left in Chicam or Egyptian. And so we have this word, we say eerie on the right-hand side. Okay, I'm using my wrong mouse. Okay. So if my mouse is moving, you can see it. Eerie, and I highlighted and I bolded and I made red the correspondences here. So where the Egyptian has the J, I'm using the German transliteration schema, or the I right here in the front. Chiluba has K. So we have Erie. This is the root which will eventually become nature. The R root. And so in Chiluba, we have Akula, oral, Akula, talk, speak, utter, express, Wakulu, language. Then we have Iri, to make, to act. Then we have Bukole, power, energy, ability to make things happen, to do things. So when we talk about power and energy, that is the noun form of the verb, a verb which comes from a root for a verb that means to do, to act, to make, or to create. So this is essentially what a god is. A being that acts, a being that creates, a being that makes something happen. So again, here built off of the same root. It's a being that does work, that puts in that work. For all the hood brothers, in the hood, you had to put in work before you can be get your thug status. So same thing here. So and there's a Heban in the Kordofan language, they still pronouncing giro, work. And so the word Iru, ancestors, in Chiluba, Bakulu, ancestors. And you can see these correspondences here. So here, if there was a K in this last variant in Chiluba, it was dropped. But they still had the same words. So we can see the correspondences here. They're regular. We can speak of cognates. And so now, comes the real. So remember where I said that the R sound in Netcher is the root of the word. Then the ch is a prefix, and then the n is a prefix. And so this root in Egyptian chikam comes from R, meaning to separate, to or towards something. In Chiluba dictionaries, it's defined as to make, leave, or exit from oneself. In other words, to throw. A sound, an idea, speech, or an object. To emit, to express, to speak, to introduce, to put, set, make, push, dispose, arrange, apply, put out, place, or to lay down. To do something, to make something move forward. That's essentially what that R root means. It's in the word keper. It's in the word per. Even in in French, it's per. It comes from this root. And so, we have Erie, to make, to create, to engender, built off of that R root. And so in Chiluba, it is Ilela, or you could say Kole, as we did earlier. So Ilela, make, a, to do, for, in favor of, versus, to the disadvantage of, launch. When you launch something, you launch it forward. To the disadvantage of, sure, against, towards, in, and then when it has this prefix, this G prefix with the agent prefix in, is pronounced ingila. It's a person who acts consistently, an agent, a doer, an agent, man of action, good marksmanship, a marksman. And so this form in Egyptian, Eru, maker of something. It's a maker, a creator, a doer. And so this same root in Chiluba gives us Inkole, Inkwele, God, in which is the form that you find here in Egyptian, Netcher, God. Inkole, Ngole, eminent or powerful man. So remember that the kings were called Netchers. Well, why is a king called a Netcher? Or an Inkole, an Ngole? Because the king has the ability, has all authority to make things happen. They can command and order people to get things done in the community. They have the power, the ability to make, the ability to act, the ability to work and make things work. That's why they are gods. You can't be a god and not be a creator, a doer of something. You can't be a lazy bum talking about we gods. And so this form, as we mentioned earlier, Bukole, Bukola, force, energy, spirit. So when we're talking about a spirit, what is a spirit? It is an agent, an invisible agent that makes things happen, that creates things, that pushes something forward, that expresses. That's what a spirit is. It's a force of energy. It's just energy. And then we have this other variant here in Ngulu, strength, physical power. And so we also mentioned that there's a word, Netcher, has to deal with water and streams and things of this nature. And we can see these variations, in these African languages. So in the Zande language, they say Motoro, God, Watoro, water, in terms of rain. In the Lugbara, remember we said Adro, God, but also Adro found in rivers. Adro, guardian spirit. And then in Wolof, Kurtor, protector God. Then the word Tor, libations. So you of course, you pour libations. So when they define God as that which you pour libations for, there's a reason for that. Because there's an association between water and God, but by way of paronymy. And so in the tree language, in Toro, the spirit of the patrilineage, then you have Intro, river. In Egyptian, you have Netcher, God. Then you have Iteru, river. Netcher, stream, canal. Netcher, water house. Netcher, lake of the Nether in Lake of Nether in Nethru. And then you have in the Ijo in Nigeria, Toro River is where we get the word torrent from in English, meaning river, you know, or fast, rapid river. And then in the Hebrew, you have matar, rain, and tal, dew, dealing with water. So you see how these concepts, you know, saying come together. So keep in mind this water, spirit, the ability to do work, all of that comes together in these conceptualizations of nature. So, but as we mentioned earlier, the ch comes from a K sound. So we should be able to find the same type of correspondences with a KR or KL variant of the term. And this is exactly what we have. So among the Acholi and Luo people, the word for river is Kulu. For divine spirit, Jok Kulu. The word for ancestors, Kwaro. The Chichua people, Kolo, ancestors. Remember Bakulu, in ancestors in Chiluba. In a tree, Kora, river. Takora, the divine spirit, God. Guare, to purify or to wash, in tree. In the Hausa language, Kwara, river. Ukure, ancestors in Hausa. In the Yoruba language, Olokun. Okun is the word for sea. That's the cognate for the word nature, meaning stream or river or waters or lake. Is Okun. And matter of fact, Oshun, which is also a river, is cognate and is the palatalized variant of Okun in Olokun. And so O being the prefix for owner of the sea. And in the Hebrew language, Inkor, river, lake, Makor, spring. So I'll leave this up here a sec, but you know, for those watching, after this has been recorded, you know, you can pause at any time and, you know, take notes of the correspondences. So we have the word Nkole, Ngole, which is an eminent or powerful man. Nkole, Nkwele, God. And so we see the symbol over here in ancient Egypt for the Necher symbol, for an eminent or powerful man. That's why that symbol is used for Necher. In the Collagen language, Ukulo, God. And in Proto-Bantu, it's the word ko, to become strong. And you know, the stronger you are, the more you can do. You know, when you are weak, you can't do anything. You just lay in the bed all day, sobbing. But once you get some of that strength, you're able to go to work. You know, fellas know what it is when you have that woman over and something of your nature gets strong. You could put in some work. But if you're sitting there limp, you can't put in no work. You're not strong. You're not in Kole. You're not nature at that moment. You know. And so the hieroglyph for the hawk should also be represented as nature as well. And in Chiluba, they don't say the equivalent. They have another word that they've adopted for hawk, but they have maintained Intala for just a male bird. But in Collagen, they have Curit, a type of hawk. And in Proto-Bantu, Kodi, hawk. And so the nature, this is all nature. All three of these are nature. And so, but we know based on Proto-Bantu that this word Kodi, hawk, is built off of this word here to become strong. And this word Kodi also applies to alligators, lions. It has anything to do with ferocious beasts who are predators, so to speak. And so that's why those animals are named nature. They come from this root meaning to be strong, to be powerful. And it's the same root that gives us the word for God, the power of force. And so I also highlighted here, of course, these correspondences in the red, the consonants, but I want you to pay attention to what I highlighted in the blue. And so you notice that the majority of these pronunciations have a O or a U as the first vowel. That's not by coincidence. They're all related in the same way. And so this is how we know that the Greek spelling of Horus, because Horus is a different dialectical variation of the word nature. We'll get more into that in the book as well. But it's built off of this Cody, hawk. But this becomes palatalized, it becomes chor and or hor. And so the Greek Horus. So when people talk about Horus, is not the pronunciation. It basically is. You could just say hor if you don't want to use, or horu if you don't want to use the Greek S suffix. It's in the word Hathor, which is Het-hor in Middle Egyptian. But it tells you here that that should be an O. And I have this picture of Dr. Khalid Muhammad, because when on the day that I was doing the presentation, before I did my presentation, I did mine after lunch. So while I was waiting in line for lunch, it was an elder there who said that, you know, I walked in pretty strong, you know, like a god, and that I reminded her of Dr. Khalid Muhammad. And she was bigging up and praising Dr. Khalid Muhammad, saying that when she was in New Orleans, when he was in New Orleans to visit, so I assume that she is from New Orleans. When he came to New Orleans to visit, that she and her friends and colleagues, you know, followed him around that day, and they said that, you know, his essence, his aura, was that of a eminent God. And, you know, when she said that, I immediately went to this screen that you see right now in my presentation, because of the Ngole, eminent or powerful man. And so at last minute, I went on the internet and found this picture of Khalid Muhammad and put him in this slideshow to show you, you know, one of our netchers, one of our Ngole, our gods, our eminent and powerful men, and what that looks like here in the States. And so big up to the sister, you know, who reminded me of that. And so, as I said earlier, so those, you know, we'll go back. So when we see here, we see O's, 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 and U. And we see O's, O's, and U's as predominant. And so even when those variations of netter from those other languages, you see T-O, it's a type of O sound. This in Toro, Nute. W, this, you know, which is a W, is Tor. You know, this, so when we're talking about pronunciation, it's more likely not netter, but, you know, in Toro, like which we have in tree, in Toro. That's probably the more accurate pronunciation of the word netter. And so you can't have a netter without a netterette. And so this is another eminent and powerful being. You know, Netcher Mukulu Inkwele, the goddess Harriet Tubman. That's who you see on the right here. And so there was a lot of talk about Harriet Tubman, so I put her in last minute, you know, in this slideshow as well. But this is the feminine form of this term. And so now we're going to get on why this notion of, you know, the concept of God in English, you know, accurately defines what is God in Africa. And so the etymological dictionary, one of many, says that the etymology of God in English means supreme being, deity, the Christian God, image of a God, godlike person, from Proto-Germanic Guthan. Sources also of Old Saxon and Old Frisian, Dutch God, Old High German Gott, German Gott, Old Norse Guth, Gothic Guth, Proto-Indo-European Gut, that which is invoked. Source also for Old Church Slavonic Zovo, to call, Sanskrit Huta, invoked, an epithet Indra, from root gu, to call or invoke. Now, remember that the root is R. And that same R is the same word for speech in African languages, including Egyptian. So when we saw Iri, to recite, the word R itself just means words or mouth in Egyptian. And so it's the basis of the words for language. And because of this paronymy, these concepts are connected. So we're talking about that which is invoked. And so you can see on this slide here, I created this table to better illustrate this fact. So the Chiluba and the Chicam, have the same root. So R, to separate, to towards, Eli, to make, leave, or exit from oneself. So anything that exits from an epicenter, a sound, an idea, speech, or an object, to emit, to express, to speak. And so this root here, Eli, just brought it down. Eli means to speak. Then we have R here, mouth, speak, in Chicam. Ilela, make a, to do. Then we have Akula, talk, express. So remember, it's a KL word root in Chiluba. And so this same root, remember, it means to emit, to express, to speak, to make. That means to do. So Bukole, energy, spirit, is the noun, the nominalization of the verb meaning to do, to make, to create. Energy, spirit, that's what it is. And so from there, Nkole, a god, powerful man. So that's what you see here. So we see how it is expressed here in Chiluba. So the same thing in Egyptian. Mouth, speak, Iri, to do, to make, Iri, to recite, Ka, spirit, because remember that Ker is the original form of Chur in Netcher, and then Ka, to say, or Ker, to say. And so the palatalized form, Netcher, God, spirit, and then Chirit, to complaint, a complaint, still having to deal with speech. It's all the same. It comes from the same root. So, when somebody's talking about that which is invoked, a god, is because they come from the same root. And so here's a different series of correspondence within the Egyptian to show exactly what I mean. So remember what I said, that this sound is a nasalized uvular trill. It is an R. So this is KR, a nasalized uvular R. So in one direction, we have kar, meaning to be powerful. It's a partial reduplication. It's supposed to be kar, or inkera, be powerful. And this concept of being powerful, goes to this variant here, to carry or to support. So you have to have strength in order to carry something. So from being powerful to, with these suffixes, it means to carry or support. But remember, a spirit is a being that can do work. And to have power, you have to have the ability to do something. Which is why with the T suffix, it means work that has been done. And so we see this word carry, support, and this word work has the same exact determinatives or classifiers. A man with something on his head, walking, carrying something, doing work at the job. So you can't be a netcher without having a job or doing something. Can't be a bum. And so from this notion of being powerful also defines the bull in ancient Egypt. So it's a big, powerful animal, a ferocious animal. That's why Kaz applied to the word for bull or oxen. And so in this other direction, because it comes from that root meaning to emanate, to speak towards something, you have the word to say. And from there, the word name and personality. And so you should actually have on here soul. So your soul, and this is discussed in Nesubiti, is your name. When you reincarnate, it's because someone has named the children after you've died. That's what a soul is. It's just a name, a personality. But it comes from this root here meaning to say. And we'll prove that in a second. And so what I want to show here is, again, remember I mentioned that the Egyptian language is monosyllabic. And so this is the root. This is another word, but it's related to the word God. So this is the J sound and the D sound, to say, to tell. But notice in the coffin text that the Jet, or, is a divine being, a God. The word to say, to tell, and a divine being, God. And so we see with a different prefix, and once they drop the D, it still has the same root, the same monosyllabic root, but now it has a different semantic connotation. To command, would you command, decree, with jet, decree, with jet, partial reduplication. What is commanded? And it should be known that this J sound derives from G. So and remember the O's that we saw earlier. This is God, God, to say, to tell. In other words, to invoke. And so when you have in Proto-Indo-European, there's going to be another lesson on the relationship between African languages and Proto-Indo-European. Gut, that which is invoked, to say, to tell, gu, to call, to invoke. And so we mentioned in Bowley's work, in the last part of the book, he deals with the relationship between Indo-European and Negro-Egyptian, and how Negro-Egyptian speakers help to influence and develop major aspects of Proto-Indo-European. And so, he did this by a series of regular sounding meaning correspondences. And so on page 565, we're going to deal with that G sound in the beginning. So he says here, G from Kui corresponds to Middle Egyptian J. Remember what I said earlier? That the J, became the G, became the J sound, or at least, this in Middle Egyptian. And so he says, and I translated from French, this correspondence shows that the primitive form of the noted Proto-Indo-European consonant G is Kui, which brings it closer to Q or H. I can't pronounce because that's the glottal stop. H. Delabelization, and explains its transition to G in the historical languages. It is permissible to consider that the Proto-Indo-European aspirate G originates from HG, as indicated by the internal correspondences to the Proto-Indo-European between G and J. So these are two different sounds. It's the aspirated J and this G, a G. And so compare Gal to call. So Proto-Indo-European Gal to call, Gal to call. So these are two different forms of the same word. So if you see a form with GH, or if you see a form with G, they're just dialectical variations of the same sound. They're allophonic in many respects. So in Proto-Indo-European, you have Gal to call, and then Gel to call. And then you have another variation, Gel cold and Gay cold. That's what id means. It means the same. Thus, Proto-Indo-European G behaves exactly like Proto-Indo-European D. That is to say, as a voiceless, labelized occlusive. And it must be the same for G, the emphatic G. This is confirmed by the corresponding Negro-Egyptian words. So when we talk about G, correspondence, this J in Middle Egyptian corresponds to G in Proto-Indo-European. And so remember that the form is gut in Proto-Indo-European. But that corresponds to T and D's interchange. So Middle Egyptian T, G, and D correspond to T and D, coming from Twi and Kui, respectively, in Proto-Indo-European. So Negro-Egyptian Tu, a labelized, variant of this T, generally corresponds to Proto-Indo-European D, but only in the Hittite can have both D and T. On the other hand, in the other Indo-European languages, the entourage can decide on the final form. This Proto-Indo-European correspondence and alternation does prove the existence of a Proto-Indo-European phoneme, which can either be reduced to T or evolve towards D. The comparison with the Negro-Egyptian makes it possible to assign it to the value 2. Perhaps realize this Again, that glottal stop, which I can't pronounce. The analysis of the results of Proto-Indo-European D, Hittite D or T or Latin D, English T, makes us think that this is actually the famous Twa, because this wonderfully explains why it was a T in some languages and D's in others, and T or D in Hittite. So just showing that on these consonants, you know, we have these correspondences, and you find that word God, meaning speech, to call, to invoke, and divine being in Middle Egyptian and other languages. And so I'm gonna get on this notion. You remember when we're talking about a spirit or a soul, and this form we said in, for example, among the Akan, they say okra or kla, okra or okla. And so in this text here, Traditional Religion in West Africa, Modupe Odeoye has an article in there, and but it's edited by a E.A. Ade Adikbola. And he talks about the okra or the nature. That's what the Akan called nature. They have the older pronunciation okra, okla, which is, he says, we can then think of kra or kla as consciousness, that part of a man that responds to a calling. In Dr. Anthony Ephraim Doncourt, in his text African Religion Defined, a systematic study of ancestor worship among the Akan, he says Kwame Gayeki, for example, maintains that the okra is located in the head, although in general the Akan believe that the seat of the okra is the shoulders, or that the shoulders balance the soul in the head as the head. The seat of intelligence sits on the shoulders. Still, the fact is that to call anyone by name is to call the soul of that individual. And since the soul is an intangible agency, it is assumed that the dead has appeared in spirit. So souls you call, gods you call, you invoke. There's a semantic relationship between these concepts. So, and I wanted to show, can you, Brother Aunt, tell me if you can hear, or whoever's on, if you can hear this video when I play it. And so those who are listening in the chat, I'm gonna try to play a video, and you let me know if you can hear me actually play the video. I'm pretty sure you'll be able to see it, but you know, I won't be able to you know, check it out with you. I won't be able to know if y'all can hear it or not. So I'm about to play it.
But what I'm telling you right here is like, if I was a lone ranger, nobody like me, and I did what I did for you, what are you going to tell the other people? So,
I'm gonna pause it for a sec. Anybody on the line, were you able to hear that? Me playing the video? Is anybody still left there? See, I can't see. Me playing the video. So you heard the video when I was playing it, correct? I see Mr. Black Culture. Yes, I hear it. Not me speaking. I just want to make clear. Not me speaking. I know y'all can hear me, but when I played the video, could y'all hear it? Okay, so I'm about to play this from the Babalawo, and this is a Babalawo in who used to live in Atlanta, and so he's going to demonstrate what a god is and why the association to call or to invoke that which is invoked is actually accurate when describing a god. So I'm about to continue playing. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Perform miracle. Exactly. Thank you. And also, if I do this and I invoke this into this, and I said into this to rise up, you call it miracle. See, African people get power.
Are you gonna do that now?
Of course, African people get power. But when we do our own power, you call it black magic. If it's a white man, you call it genius. It's a shame, because God gave everybody their power. Okay? Now, if I invoke this now, it will rise up. It will be staying down my hand like this. But if I invoke it, it will rise up. I said, no, video was on the film. Okay, the year form. Okay, my love. See? So you invoke it and tell him to go and sit down. And Joko fi balẹ̀ dalagbẹ̀dẹ. Joko, ṣẹlẹ̀ the marriage. The video was on the film. See? You can see the way it goes. You know? Wow. So the more you see, the more you know. If you don't search, you don't go places, you don't know.
So hopefully y'all were able to see that. Again, if you weren't able to see it, again, the video is, it says intro Babalawo of Atlanta part 2. I think I started it around 7 minutes. And so if you paid attention to it, you saw that let me skip here. Okay, so you saw that he had a calabash or something, this device in his hand that was laid flat. Now he called to it and invoked it and told it to rise in Yoruba. And the thing in his hand rose. Now, I don't believe this to be trick camera, but I'm not here to debate whether that was a trick, a camera trick or anything to this nature. But what you can gather from the video is that there is a spirit inside of the jar or whatever it is that he had. And in order for it to rise, he had to call it. He had to activate it by voice. And because he called it, he invoked it and commanded it to do something, it did it. And that's the important thing that I want y'all to get, from this conceptualization of what a God is. A God is invoked, which is why, the Egyptians were careful on who knew their names, their real names. Because if you know someone's name, if you know certain words of power, certain heka, which also means to call, you can possess them and make them do things against their will. At least that's the belief. So I'm just the messenger right now. I'm not arguing for whether this is accurate or not, but this is at minimum the belief. And so I see Amin Tahuti, he says, so is it accurate to say that we are our souls? Your name is your soul. The word for soul and name are the same. That's all it is. Your soul is your name. But I'm going to move on now. So, and so I have Netzer here, an alternative etymology. And now I'm going to try to go through these a little faster so I can wrap up. And so I want to argue that, so we got that variant of the word Netzer, a source meaning to do, to make things happen, coming from the same root that gives you words for speech. It is a power, when it pertains to a person or a spirit, it is one that is powerful, the one that has the ability to make things happen. And so, or is that which is invoked, that which is called upon to do a certain task, in the diurnal world. And so, but here's another alternative, to at least one variant of the word Netzer. So what I want to propose here is that there's a relationship between the color red, the physical liquid of blood, and there is a derived notion of life, existence, of being as a result of this concept of life. So we all know that blood is life. If you lose too much blood, you die. It's like oxygen, it's like breath, you die. Blood is essential. Blood is life. And so, I can transfer my life force through my blood and give you a blood transfusion, and save your life. And so we all understood from the earliest of days that we can't lose a lot of blood. Blood is life. And so they become synonymous in African languages. And so in the Chiluba language, you had this word moyo or moyi or muoyo, which means heart, life, spirit, soul, courage, will, desire, purpose, inclination, feeling, mood, thought. But the real root is the word for heart. And so from heart comes all these other derivatives. A cognate for that is in isiZulu, is called umoya, air, spirit, soul, wind, breath. And that's because words for heart are also words for liver and words for your respiratory system. So it has to do with all your major internal organs in the early African languages. So while we separated, we have different words for spleen, for liver, heart, and your lungs. The early Cyena-Ntu speakers, they use the same word for all three. So, and then you have derivatives of that. So with the word for lung comes the word for air, soul, wind. So this is how the word for spirit becomes associated with wind, or at least one way. It comes the same way twice via another path. But the cognate in the tree language is mogya, which is blood. So from heart to blood. In the Hausa, ja, red, tree, ogya, fire, and fire being red. In the Yoruba language, eje, blood, lifeblood. The j, the y, and the w sound in Yoruba interchange. So you have iye, survival, salvation, life. And we have iye, or iya, mother. So for all y'all in the Yoruba tradition, and you hear about the iyami, those divine mothers, of the village, that comes from that same root. But ultimately it comes from a root meaning heart and blood. And so from there they did some semantic shading, and it became word for life, survival, and mother, one who brings life. But in the Mande language, they say Gioli or Gioli, blood. In Lingala, Makila, blood. In Middle Egyptian, the word for heart, hearty, heart and chest. In the Hausa language, Kurji, Ji being a suffix, chest. In the Yoruba, Okan, meaning heart. All of these are the same word, except the words starting from the Yoruba going up, they lost the second syllable that you see here, which were originally suffixes for parts of the body. So that's how we know it started off as heart first. And then from heart came blood, and then from blood came red, and then from blood came life. So with that said, in the ancient Egyptian language, we have neter, and another form, netur, heart of a king, of a god. And then we have the word tur, blood, red liquid. And then chur, blood, red liquid. And then, of course, netur, God, spirit. So remember, if we go back here, in moyo, heart, life, spirit, moya, spirit. But all this comes from blood and air. And so it's the same thing here. It's the same line. Netur, heart, chur, blood, red liquid, and then netur, God, spirit. So it's all the same. So we get the word twice in the Egyptian language from two different roots. And so they all kind of conceptually and linguistically merge together. And so no, the Egyptians didn't call themselves black for Amentuhuti. And so now we're going to go to the last phase, in which the neter is a cloth. And so in front of the temples, you would see back in the ancient Egyptian days, the poles with the flags, at the top, and so that was the symbol of a god. But you find these also in West and Central Africa. And so I'm reading from, an excerpt from the book. So the combination of a piece of cloth and a pole to represent an aspect of the spirit world is pretty widespread in traditional Africa. An example can be seen in Nigeria and Benin among the Yoruba, Igbo, and the Fon, respectively, as it regards the medicine men, the diviners, or the Awo, who travel to do consultations in the villages and who advertise by a distinct mark. So in Agdebola, again, that book on West Africa, on page 66, talking about the Babalawos, he says that they were pastors, advisors, consultants. They hardly preached. The closest to their function in the work of ministers of the church is the pastoral counseling in one-to-one confidential situations. So, you know, if you've ever visited the Babalawo, you have one-on-one consultation where we do divinations, and we bring up the Odus, which will help you in your situation in life at that time. So, and yet from this base of privacy of Awo, their reputation was noised abroad by word of mouth, and worried people traveled to consult them. Over their dwellings, they hoisted a white cloth on a pole. That white cloth is the Babalawo's symbolic way of announcing, here you may ask of God. And wherever in Yoruba land, in Igbo land, or in Dahomey, one sees the white cloth fluttering atop a pole, one knows wordlessly that there dwells a wise man, a medicine man, perhaps also a magician, invariably a man of God. So you see, all the way over here in Yoruba land, far removed from ancient Egypt, the cloth hanging from the pole still symbolizes the exact same thing. So I'm answering this question, you know, that Brother Unc brought up earlier. So in my book, I also interview, so I do a little bit of field research, a brother by the name of Dr. Bavuma T. Moyo. He's a PhD in chemistry. And he lived in Houston, Texas. I think he lives in Florida now, but he's originally from Zimbabwe. And so he's from Binduran, Mashonaland Central, and he's of the Mukaranga or the Inkalanga people. These are the people who built the great, you know, Zimbabwe temples and monuments that you see down there in Zimbabwe, you know. And so that's the name of the ethnic group. So he belongs to that group. And so I had asked him some questions, you know, about funeral rites. And this is what he told me. So basically, I'm reading again from my book. So during a funeral among his people, talking about Dr. Moyo, there is a cloak that is used to cover the deceased. This cloak has fringes on the edges, which are torn off into strips and tied around the head of the family members of the deceased. Before the final burial, the pieces of the cloak are then collected and buried with the deceased as vortives. The Sorira, or the best friend of the deceased, carries out this procedure. I, meaning me, was informed that Dr. Moyo has also seen these strips of cloth, often red in color, tied to a pole and hoisted, just like what we saw in Nigeria. This was to let everyone in the village know that there was death in the homestead. The name of this cloth, according to Moyo, is Muchira or Inchira. A Shona Bantu dictionary has Jira, cloth. So without him even knowing this, Muchira or Inchira or Netcher, because remember, Netcher is the name of the cloth or fabric. It's some linen fabric. And that's what is wrapped around the pole and what was hanging from the pole in the earlier renditions of the word Netcher that I showed you in the beginning. So all the way here in Southeast Africa, in Zimbabwe, you see Netcher associated, the flagpole associated with ancestors, the gods, the spirits. And so in this, there's an article called The Regalia Associated with ATR, which is African Traditional Religions. And so in there, he says Jira Machira for the cloths. And so he said that the Muzimu, the Mashave, these are names for spirits. These are guardian spirits. These are guardian spirits that possess mediums. They possess people and own one or two pieces of Machira, Netcher cloth. Again, Machira associated or Netcher, because remember he uses Inchira or Muchira, but in this text they use Jira and Machira. So just dialectical variations for this cloth, and this is an example of the cloth of Muchira, you know, right here with these kind of step pyramid type designs in them, you know, and so they're associated with guardian spirits, the Mudzimu. And, you know, the Mudzimu is actually cognate with the word, which we say Aku in Egyptian. But you'll see how that is the case. This is an exact cognate, Zimu. And so in Agdebole, again, in a separate article, they talk about, we're back in Benin now. And so the Osogbaye, which is a shrine, it's a shrine, not necessarily a shrine, what is an altar shrine. And they say at the worship of Osogbaye, which is the one rare clear instance of the worship of the supreme being, a pole is dug into the ground with sand piled up around it. By it is placed a coconut rubbed with a mixture of orhue, or white chalk. I don't know how to pronounce that, so I know I'm murdering it, all you Benin people. And a separate piece of orhue. A white piece of cloth is tied to the top of the pole. It is not only to the supreme God that the white chalk is offered, but the white chalk is offered to all deities. It is also used in ritual worship to Urha, ancestors. So again, a white piece of cloth tied to the top of a pole. Exactly what we see in ancient Egypt, you know, around their shrines. And so Robert Ferris Thompson, in his article called The Face of the Gods, the Artists and Their Altars, there's actually a book titled by this as well. And so he talks about the Suriname in South Africa, South America, the Njuka and Samaka people who were brought over here, of course, from the Congo into South America. And so they brought with them their traditions. And he's talking about these flags, these cloths tied to the top of poles that are used as altars to the deities. And he says these flags are honored heroic ancestors who heard the guns of war, who successfully fought for liberation from plantation slavery in the 18th century. The Congo used flags to spiritually capture the wind. Their word for flag also carries meanings of wind and spirit, a banner waving in the breeze that represents an honored ancestor. So from ancient Egypt to Nigeria, to Benin, to Congo, to Zimbabwe, we are seeing the same cultural phenomenon. And so I would argue that this is the case because they, again, belong to Cyena-Ntu. They all belong to the same Ntu family. And so these concepts were brought, spread out with them as they came from their central location of origin. And so this was brought into New Orleans from the Congo as well. And so instead of the poles, we used umbrellas and we attached the strings, the cloth representing the ancestors on the umbrellas. So you're seeing netcher. These are used in the jazz funerals in New Orleans. And the flags representing spirits and things also exist in Haiti. I meant to put that into this presentation, you know, for the Loa. And so, you know, it's all related. And so I want to say this is my last slide. And so with Kendrick Lamar's video, you know, All the Stars, we see this last scene with Kendrick Lamar in the center in front of these tall, these four goddesses who are double or triple his size. But behind him, you see these poles with the flags on them, the cloths. Also in water. Why is the water important? That's why I mentioned this earlier. And so you see the netchers. These are four netcherus or netcherites or netchereets for the plural feminine. You know, these are goddesses, the netchers. and he has the symbols of the Netchers right behind him. And so that's the last, of that slide. So again, y'all got the extended version, and I hope what I said makes sense. And I'm gonna stop sharing at the moment, and so you can see my grizzly face once more. And so I'm looking in the chat and seeing if there's any questions or anything to that nature. It doesn't look like it at this moment, and I know there's a slight time delay. So so if anyone has any comment or question while I'm on, I know we've been here for about 2 hours now, and so it doesn't look like whoever came on my panel dropped out. So Brother Unk is gone, so no one's on the panel, so it's just me. So if any of you have any questions or anything to that nature, please hit me up in the chat right now, because if I don't have any questions, then I will end this. But definitely comments and questions below in the comment section. So Lionel says, my little girl says you're a good teacher. Well, tell her thank you. And and thank you to all you who learned, who listened, for 2 hours straight of me jibber jabbing about Netcher and Cyena-Ntu in Africa and all that black stuff, that a lot of people like to run from. So, let me see. What's the best method to learn Medu Neter? I would say go to meduneter.com, MDW, I think, -NTR.com, and sign up for one of Wujawu's of the Seshu Medu Neter group, his course. And so there's a group on Facebook as well. I'm sure somebody in the chat can give you more information, because there's a few of the students / teachers in that group who are in the chat right now who could tell you. So I would recommend that you learn through our good brother Ujawu, and there's other people. There's like Brother Banachi, there's Sister Dr. Raketi Amin, there's Mfudishi out of New York. If it's depending on where you live and you want something a little bit more personal and one-on-one, if you live in those areas. But online, Ujawu is holding it down. And so I appreciate, again, thank you for everyone. I'm trying to scroll and see if there's any questions. Based on the connection between the current and classical African languages, is it possible to revive the language of ancient Kemet? And if so, what progress has been made thus far? There's actually a group of us, which includes Brother Wujaru, Dr. Raketi Amin, Jean-Claude Mboli, who I mentioned earlier, Dr. Cambone out of Ghana, Dr. Mario Beatty of ASCAC, who I mentioned earlier, and a few other individuals who were involved in the process of Dr. What's his name? Rashad Kamal out of Chicago, and the Kemetic Institute, out of there. We're all in a group, and we're going through that process of trying to revitalize the ancient Egyptian, Middle Egyptian language. So that work is being done, and we're at the beginning stages of that. So not much progress on our end, but there seems to be other groups, especially some French-speaking African groups, that have been trying to do it as well. So I don't know how far they've gotten in their cipher, but for us, we're for the most part just getting started. We just had a conference, our first conference last year in Chicago, I think sometime around October or something like that. So what do I think of Shaka's assessment of Set? I can't answer that because I haven't heard his assessment of Set. So I really can't answer that. I'm sorry. Let me see. It's cool to be black and nerdy. Damn right. Yeah, he put in there seshmetaneture.com. So that's from June Money, seshmetaneture.com. Yeah, so I totally messed up the link earlier. So listen now, it's seshmetaneture.com. And so I'll put the link in the comments or in the description a little later. Yeah, the Europeans consider so-called Israel to be the Holy Land and not Egypt. In your opinion, I was wanting to know, why do Europeans consider so-called Israel to be the Holy Land and not Egypt? Because Europeans are associated with Israel, and every group has a right to decide what they think is holy or not. And so, they don't have to say Egypt is holy. Egypt don't have to be holy. Why not? Why not Zimbabwe? Why not South Africa? Why not Nigeria be the Holy Land? Why not Senegal? It's all God's green earth. And so people just choose what they want to be holy or not. Do you think that's where nations' flags come from? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not sure. But, well, certain flags or certain spirits represent the spirit of the town or the village. So it may have evolved from there. I can see that happening. And saying, does the ancient Kemetic spiritual system align heavenly with metaphysics? It depends on how you define metaphysics. So my understanding of metaphysics is just talking about a set of books that comes after the I think it was Aristotle's set of physics books. That's where metaphysics comes after the physics. So he's talking about a set of sciences that came after the set. Like you see the books aligned over here. So I have one book. The last book was physics, and then whatever was after that is metaphysics. It's not what everybody thinks metaphysics is. And so it really depends on what you're talking about in terms of metaphysics. So doesn't look like there's any more questions. So I will end this. And so if you have any questions or comments, please leave it in the comment section. So once again, I appreciate everyone for tuning in and staying with me this long, especially on a Friday night. Y'all could be at the club, or y'all probably getting ready to go to the club. I don't know. But you chose to sit here, with me. So I appreciate you all. Thank you all for listening. And I'm about to go make me a snack. So God bless you all. Praise to the ancestors. Ashe, ashe, ashe. To. Peace.